All right, my name is not important. All I'm doing is grounding the room. Okay. So part of why we want to honor grounding is because I'm guessing that for the sentient beings that are in the space, you've probably been doing a million different things before you got to this moment today, checking your texts, your emails, making sure family and friends are okay, that whole kind of deal. And what we wanted to do in grounding is just make sure that we are all present and all in the space so that we can practice this experiment called community together in this conversation. And one of the things that has come up that I thought we could use just to ground ourselves in this is something that I know has been a point that's come up in a lot of the dialogues, not just here, but in a lot of other community spaces about honoring that it's not just us who shows up in the room. So you came in here with maybe your hat and your coat and this whole kind of thing, but you also came in here representing your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents. Their energy is in the space. We bring them wherever we go. And so I wanted to ask us to ground ourselves in knowing that this is also a conversation that looks 3 generations behind us, 3 generations in front of us, and thinking about how we are all experiencing the practice, the attempt, the invitation to be in community together. And I ask you to think about who you have brought into the space with you, who you are representing and thinking through and hearing the stories that we're going to share about this experience we've been having, and how we've been holding space with community. I know for me, I've been thinking about 3 generations before me, which would be my great grandmother. And how would she have thought about everything we're discussing? I think about 3 generations after me. And what will my great great grandchildren think about what we're doing right in this moment? So I ask you not to just be present in the space um, abstractly, loosely, but to think about who all has come into the space with you and why this matters, and that we can be present for the dialogue with a moral imperative of knowing that we are not just representing ourselves, but we are representing the hearts and the souls and the voices and the consciousness of many, many more people than just the bodies that are in the space.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming tonight. My name is Jen Leahy, and I'm the Deputy Director for Learning and Engagement here at the Columbus Museum of Art. We are very proud to be hosting tonight's important conversation. The Reimagining Columbus project is fully funded by the Mellon Foundation's Monuments Project, which is a multi-year commitment aimed at addressing the nation's commemorative landscape to ensure our collective histories are more completely and accurately represented. After the removal of the statue of Christopher Columbus from in front of City Hall in the summer of 2020, the City of Columbus approached the Mellon Foundation with a plan to engage our community on the subject of inclusion and representation through public art. This resulted in a $2 million investment from the Mellon Foundation, as well as a $1.5 million commitment from the city to fund new public art at the City Hall campus. So a logical first question was, okay, well, what are you going to do with the statue? And the answer from the beginning from this amazing team and many others who are not on stage tonight was, we don't know yet. We're going to engage the community with these greater issues. And what comes out of those engagements is what is going to set the design scheme for that. The project team has engaged with the community through a variety of events. Many of you may have participated in them. And the process has evolved with each event as the team has learned and built upon the stories and feedback heard from the community. While the statue is the convener of the conversation, the engagement has been about much more than simply the statue. And with the support from the Mellon Foundation, Columbus has been given the opportunity to learn from each other and to consider what meaningful representation looks like for our city in the 21st century. So tonight we will hear some insights and themes, and we will leave, we will leave inspired to shape a more inclusive future through our commemorative landscape, thanks to these amazing panelists who I will introduce now. So Kimberly Danielle, who grounded us, is a passionate social justice leader and has nearly 20 years of experience advocating for equity and inclusion. She has expertise in trauma-informed social justice, mental health, and social emotional support. She uses creative and holistic approaches to address complex human problems in organizations. She's adept at building strong relationships with stakeholders, respectfully challenging norms, navigating complex political environments, and fostering understanding across diverse groups to create more inclusive systems. Shelley Corbin, or Dakoni Kokipeshni, is an Itazi Pacho Minichozu Lakota from the Cheyenne River Reservation. She currently lives in Grove City, Ohio. With more than 17 years in the military and ongoing service in the Ohio Air National Guard, she now contributes as a field organizer for the Sierra Club. Her work emphasizes the importance of information sharing, community engagement, and addressing issues to enhance collective power. Shelley aims to transform mainstream perspectives to understand and respect Indigenous knowledge. She has recognized the critical role of community in fostering connection, healing, and evolution to create a brighter future for all. Amanda Golden is the managing principal and co-founder of Designing Local. She is an urban planner, arts administrator, curator, creative placemaker, and has worked in the public art and cultural planning field since 2014. At Designing Local, Amanda oversees the creation of public art and cultural plans for a variety of cities across the United States and works with private developers to integrate public art and cultural programming within their developments. She has worked on over 50 plans in over 25 states. Ours is undoubtedly the best. And has managed complex public art commissions and has worked on multiple NEA Our Town grant projects. Designing Local is the project manager for the Reimagining Columbus project. And last but not least, Erin Blue is the Special Cultural Projects Coordinator with the City of Columbus and was brought on to serve as project manager for Reimagining Columbus. Erin has served as a fundraiser and administrator in the Columbus arts community for more than 20 years, working with organizations such as the Columbus Museum of Art, the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, Opera Columbus, and the McConnell Arts Center, as well as the Columbus Metropolitan Library. So thank you all for being here. I know you will all be quite impressed by our panelists. And actually, the first question is for you, Erin. So I said a little bit about this project, but if you could just remind us of how the Reimagining Columbus project came about and what its stated purpose was.
Thank you. Oh, hello there. We're live. Thanks, Jen, also for being with us on stage tonight. We're excited to be here with you and with all of you that have joined us this evening. I was not a part of the city when this project initially began, but there were conversations early on about what to do after the decision to remove the statue. A really amazing opportunity came up to approach Mellon Foundation and to be part of that. And so really the opportunity, I feel like all of my great words are in the introduction you just gave, so I'm going to repeat some of them. But really the idea of being able to take some time, the gift of the Mellon funding is really to be able to take time with this conversation to engage with the community in a way that maybe the city of Columbus has not traditionally engaged. And what can we learn as the city, but also what can we learn as a community about each other through this process? And how can this inform new ways of interaction moving forward? But really for us, the process is the point. So this 2 years is really to have meaningful dialogue and genuine connection with each other, and we're really excited about the work that has taken place so far and what is to come.
Great. Amanda, how did you go about building the project team for Reimagining Columbus? So what was important to you as you were selecting people to work on this?
Yes, so we have a huge team. If you have not seen the full roster of the team, please visit the project website to check everybody out. We have about 25 different sub-consultants. When we read the RFP that the city put out, it was really about recontextualization of the statue. And we knew in order for Designing Local and for our team to be involved in such a difficult and important project that we were going to build the team that we knew could deliver what Columbus deserved. And I believe that we did that. We knew that we had to have architectural leaders who looked different than every other design project that Columbus has had. And so you'll notice our lead architect is Tamara Bigay, who owns Indigenous Design Studio and Architecture out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's one of 12 licensed Indigenous architects in the country, and 8 of them work at her firm. So she is leading this from a design standpoint, which is really exciting. We knew in order to do this project, the community voice and the approach in which we approach the community had to be different and had to be very different than we would approach it. We're all planners and arts administrators and landscape architects at Designing Local, and we're I like to say we do creative engagement, but we don't really. We still bring the boards and the dots, right? And we knew in order to do this right, we had to bring people on board who would approach the community and hear from the community in a really authentic way, which is why we approached Kim to come on to our team. I think she was a little skeptical at first to join a team that was talking about Christopher Columbus and the statue and its final disposition. But we also knew that we wanted to engage people in different places. So not just in our traditional locations like City Hall or city facilities. We wanted to engage people outside in nature where we know people can connect to each other best and can connect to Earth best. And that's why we brought on Shelley. Shelley has a long-standing commitment to the project and has been on the statue committee since its inception. And we knew that bringing her on would facilitate opportunities for families to participate in the dialogue and also have conversations with someone who is Indigenous. We knew Shelley is approachable and honest and genuine in the way that she shows up, and she did that for so many people who participated in those conversations. We also had a number of other folks on the team. We have a cultural competency committee who reviews all of our content before it goes out. We really want to make sure that as designers and planners, we're not putting out content that really isn't seeing the whole picture. So we have Dr. Melissa Crum on the team. We have Dr. Jason Reese from Ohio State. We have Tamara sits on that team as well. And we have Nancy Ritchie, who is a local historian. We have a number of other folks, a public art coordinator from Washington, D.C., Carrie Kennedy. She also has a consulting firm called Cultural Memory. Her work focuses on the presence of Black Americans in the nation's public art collection. And then we also have DLR Group, who is a supportive architect and does a lot of cultural facilities all throughout the country. So I could go on and on about how wonderful the team was, but we knew in order to deliver the project that Columbus deserved, the team had to be robust, it had to be diverse, and people had to be willing to come on to do a project that was going to be extremely difficult from the very beginning and agree to disagree throughout the entire process. And everyone has shown up in that way and done a very good job doing that.
It's sort of a dubious sales pitch. So I'd love to hear from Kim and Shelley. Like, why did you sign on? Kim, would you start?
Sure. So Amanda's right. The initial response was no, but thank you for calling. And
I did call.
You did call. But it's also important for me because of the kind of work that I do. When it's about community, it's not supposed to be an automatic no. It should be a listen, hold the space, and see if it's possible that a no could become a slow yes. And so we had a conversation, and the conversation, my discomfort and the importance of having a rich and important and necessary conversation about it. Both of those things, though not the same at all. Two different things can exist at the same time. And so I said yes because I knew that there's going to be a lot of people who probably should be in the room who will say no. And that it was important for me to be there. And to be completely honest, I remember the day that we were talking on the phone, my youngest daughter's like down the hall. I'm thinking like, she needs me to say yes to this, so that this is my attempt to have my daughter's voice in the room, when this happens. And so that's a lot of why. And then talking with you and hearing the honest approach, and that this was going to be designed in a different kind of way. It wouldn't just be business as usual, but there could be some meaning, some soul, some heart in it that convinced me to say yes.
Shelley, why did you say yes?
Well, I was already kind of on the, as Amanda mentioned, the Christopher Columbus Statue Committee And I knew that through that process, it was a learning process, and that I wanted to be involved. I wasn't going to go and ask Amanda if I could be a part of her team. So what I did was I just took what I knew and I learned, and I went back to the community and had some in-depth conversations. And where I landed was I knew Indigenous knowledge was a priority for me to share with, as mentioned in my bio, like with the mainstream, with the rest of society, and with honoring it and respecting it, and how do we incorporate some of that, especially as an Indigenous woman living in the rest of society and not necessarily on a reservation with my community, my close knit community, my family. And so where I kind of landed in my journey was I felt it was most important at the time that we root in our children, like Danielle said. And, where were we at with storytelling? Like so much of Indigenous cultures around the world really root in the art of storytelling, like literally speaking stories into existence. And for us, we don't have a written language. And none of it's written down because we are constantly evolving and changing. And so I had a conversation with Amanda, and the conversation kind of went like this, is like, hey, I'm writing these children's books, and I want my children, and of all the children, I want to work with schools. And I was telling her, I have this idea that I just really want to foster spaces where children can be children, but more importantly, that they can tell their own future, that we give them the opportunity and space to play, to work with the youth. And I think that's most important. And I think one of the pathways to get there is to get people and children back and connected with nature. And that's just the pathway that I saw. And Amanda said, you can do that. We'll create the space. We have a budget. If you could come in and lead some nature hikes and some dialogue around this would be great. And that's what I did. And so really it was kind of, really just universal connection that brought us into that space of really where I was going, but really where the Christopher Columbus Statue Committee already kind of landed me, and just taking that learning opportunity and trying to still move forward. Even if I wasn't going to be a part of the project, I still really wanted to incorporate my learned experience. And so here I am.
I love that. That's beautiful. So as Shelley is alluding, there were many different components of this project. So Erin and Amanda, I think it'd be great to hear you talk about what some of those different components were and how they supported the overall goals.
So one of the things that as we looked at different ways to engage, and again, the hope is that this is something that inspires us all to engage differently, not just within this project, but that there are legs after this 2 years is over. So what are the different ways that we can communicate and engage with people at different times of day, different locations? Some places are, truly going to be just for adult conversation, right? That's a very important part of the system, but we also wanted to make sure we could engage with families, as Shelley talked about, and with youth. And so, in addition to having conversations, we also did family-friendly mound, like workshops around building monuments, and how have we used monuments to tell the story of history in our country, and having those kind of conversations with young people as opposed to just kind of having adult conversations. And then also, of course, Shelley talked at length about already the great walks that we held at several different locations around Central Ohio. But Amanda also worked with Kim on the other pieces of the engagement.
Yeah. Yes, we'll talk about those in just a little bit. But one of the other things that I hope all of you have been able to experience are all the different learning materials that our team has worked very hard to create. I'm sure I recognize so many of your faces in here, so I know so many of you have participated in the conversations that we've had. But as you know, this topic is so complex. And when you flip over one thing, there's like 5 more things that it brings up questions about. And our team knew that, and we designed this whole thing to be fluid and to be able to be reactive to the things that we were learning and hearing from community. And so we knew to document those learning moments, we had to be really skillful and thoughtful about how we did that. So there are 12 learning videos online right now. They range from lectures to talking circles with 12 Indigenous folks that gathered together at Ohio State from the Department of Indigenous Studies. We had a lecture with Kirk Savage, who is National Park Service Monuments Man. If you didn't come to that lecture, it was wonderful. But he's been working on monuments and doing that research for decades. And he did a really great lecture. Tamara did a lecture on Indigenous design. But Jason Reese did a lecture on immigration patterns in Columbus, which is really key to this conversation, right? So the statue didn't only have relevance in 2020. There's an entire history to it that is so important. Our team is also currently working on a long video that's going to be detailing out the importance of the statue and its gift to our city from our sister city, Genoa. We hope that that'll be out in February and that we'll be able to have a panel discussion on that as well in the coming months. Our team also has worked hard on taking really dense historic documents and putting them into really interesting ways to view online. So on the website, you can go and explore Ohio's history next to our nation's history, next to our local history, and see how those things are really parallel and kind of what played out in Columbus versus what played out in New York City at the same time, right? So we really wanted to show the interconnectedness of everything that's happening all over the country and everything that has happened all over the country and how Columbus is connected to those things. So on the website, you'll be able to view right now, view all that content there. So we've spent a lot of time really being thoughtful about that content. We also have been extremely thoughtful about connecting to other things that are happening within our region. With the recent UNESCO designation and World Heritage Site, we've been in conversation with Ohio History Connection. Erin can chime in here with other initiatives.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, of course, we also, there is a component of this project that is about public art at City Hall campus. So there is, of course, another initiative that GCAC is leading about a public art plan for the greater community. So the timing of those two projects, although some people don't know which project is which, we've been very good about trying to make sure we differentiate between the two. But then also there's the new park in Xenia that opened, the Great Council State Park, that is a new state park that the governor's office worked on with Indigenous tribes. And then Yellow Springs, WYSO, if you haven't heard it, has a great podcast called The Ohio Country, and it's a 12-series podcast on the removal of Indigenous people from the area called Ohio. So there are a lot of different things happening in our community in pockets, and we saw so much alignment with the work that we were doing with this project and being able to lift up those initiatives overall, which is pretty exciting.
I love that. And obviously, I obviously need to carve out some more time to watch some of these learning resources. The ones I've watched have been phenomenal, but you've mentioned a couple I haven't seen yet. They're well worth the time to dig into. I wonder if, Shelley, you talked a little bit already about the mound walks, but could you talk a bit about how the mound walks and monument building workshops provided a different way to engage the public and sort of how they were different from the more conversation-focused events?
Absolutely. So in kind of planning, the mound walks, so we went to 3 different locations. And with every location, I would say the attractiveness, the energy that we created on these mound walks, it grew. And so by the final event, we had actually shut down the event for RSVPs because we were literally sold out. We were providing a free meal, so that was an incentive to come and break bread with us.
How many hamburgers we could cook?
Right? Yes.
God.
Yeah, and so we went to 3 different locations. We went to High Banks. We went to Darby Creek, which has a sacred site as well. High Banks does as well, and then also we wanted to focus on and have a dialogue, a conversation around Chief Leatherlips and the monument in Dublin. And so how they were different, I would describe them as, as I mentioned before, really the focus for me was on children and on families and how can we create a space that feels inclusive to littles and to, all age groups? And also, how do we create a space that feels more open, inviting, and, to be honest, playful? And break the mold that I would say from traditional, this setting, like where we're kind of just sitting, listening to us talk at you. I wanted to create a space that was really created an active dialogue that was really a space to ask questions and not provide statements. And I feel like from the feedback that I've gotten on the mound walks, which we walk together, we have conversations about, whether it's my perspective, which is an Indigenous perspective or a cultural perspective about the land and our connectedness with the land and with the living world and with the site itself, and how we view the mounds right now as the original form of art that our ancestors of this land created for us, that survived through time and space to then still be here present and still be a form of energy that we could connect to. And so I led these walks, and throughout the walk, with every event that passed, the amount of questions and the dialogue had increased compared to the workshops, compared to any other space that I was involved in, whether it be the story lab or, the workshops themselves, the learning series. There's a sense of the connectedness in putting individuals at ease when we are out in nature. It takes away, barriers. And it really did feel like a lot of barriers, expectations had come down when we're out in a space, walking, connecting, having conversation, asking. A lot of people were asking questions and engaging. And that's really the space I was looking to cultivate, a learning, open, shared space. And I really feel like, the walks provided that opportunity for people to develop relationships, and just feel more connected. And I feel like that was successful. And I know it was successful because at the end of the last event, everybody wanted another space. That was the feedback that we got. Is the sheer numbers of attendance was through the roof, but the request was for more spaces. And really, the community, the people that did come, wanted to form a community and to continue the dialogue. And so that just shows the impact that we did have.
I love the way you talk about the thoughtfulness that you brought to creating the conditions for the connection, for the curiosity, for those genuine ways of learning. On sort of a similar thread about shaping the conditions for learning, can you open each of the conversation events with something called the 9 Asks? Could you talk a little bit about them and how they help to set the tone for the sorts of conversations that we need to have?
Sure. So, for context, I've been doing community work for a really long time. And I want to say maybe 10, 15 years ago, I had started this learning community with different human beings just in the room. And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to get all of them to talk for real? Because, how many of us have surface level conversations all the time? The transactional conversations, they mean nothing. You're not going to remember anything that you said, what the other person said. And I knew it needed to be more than that. So a bazillion years ago, when I did this, I asked the people, what must be so for you to have an honest, real, authentic conversation, really be in dialogue with people and not send your representative to have the conversation. And they shared with me what they needed to be so for the space to feel a little bit safer. We throw out the term, this is a safe space, too much. And most spaces are not safe. Safety is person specific, and you have to know a person's story or understand them and then be willing to negotiate and give up a little bit of what you need for someone else to feel safe. And most of us do not do that. So over the years, I would ask people what they needed, and there was a pattern that emerged, which was these 9 things. Demographic didn't matter. If it was the bravest conversation I ever had about race was with 3rd graders, but I've talked with, women who were new to the United States, who had given up culture so their kids could, be successful, all kinds of Same 9 things. I call them the 9 asks. We have too many rules of the road. These are invitations, right? This is an invitation. I am asking you if you are willing to be in agreement with me about these 9 things. I thought these would be a good way to center what we were going to build based on a lot of the conversation we had about what we wanted to create on a deeper level. Because yes, this project is about the statue, but it's about more than that. And we really wanted it to be an opportunity for people to get a little bit deeper. You can have this surface level conversation, but let's talk about what's sitting underneath it, what these stories mean to you. Let's talk about why you did show up. Let's talk about the people who didn't show up and why they didn't show up. Let's talk about the emotions that have come into space, because these were very emotionally charged conversations. So we knew we had to give some context so people could honor the humanity and other people sitting across from them. We used the 9 asks to do that. And these 9 things are ways to make spaces feel a little bit safer, a little bit braver, a little more courageous, so we can kind of do the tough thing, have a real conversation, and honor people at the same time. And I think too that, and this isn't part of this, but I just wanted to say this. I think I've heard a lot since this project started about people saying things in community like, oh, we got all of this money so people could sit and have another conversation, right? And people said, there's all of these other things that could be happening in the community, and somebody just paid all this money for people to have a conversation. So clearly, if people dug into the work, and the website there is so much there, right? There's so many people who have poured so much work and subject matter expertise and gifts, talents, abilities, anointings into the work that they've done for this project. But on top of that, what I was hoping is, could these be opportunities for conversation to be transformative, right? If you're only going to give me one time sitting across from someone who I have nothing in common with, and something comes up and it prickles you and it prickles me, is there an opportunity or an invitation for me to stretch and grow a little bit, and for you to stretch and grow a little bit? And that was the point of kind of centering the 9 asks in the space for everything we did when we knew we were going to bring people into a conversation that was going to be difficult.
Here's a question for Amanda and Aaron that I bet you've heard a few times. Why didn't the public engagement sessions focus more on the statue?
Oh, is there a statue?
Yes.
I think that once again, we wanted to talk about more than just a statue. The grant deliverable is to have a recommendation for the future disposition of the statue. That is what is being delivered to the mayor's office at the end of this project. That is the grant that we wrote. That's the grant that we received funds for. So we're going to get there. But again, this gift of time to be able to have genuine conversations and create genuine connection, especially, how many times have we said, kind of out of COVID, after COVID, all of our communities got very small. And those were kind of your top folks, right? So that was a good thing. But we kind of forgot how to engage with each other, engage with people that aren't a part of your inner circle. And so this is really an opportunity, again, for us to do more than just make a decision about a statue, because, we are the largest city named Columbus. We're not changing the name. Flavortown. It's not happening. So how can we do something differently? A lot of people talk about the Columbus way, right? We don't do things the way people expect. So here we are, not doing things the way people expect. We need to be able to look at the legacy of our namesake in a different way in the 21st century, and so this is why we needed to connect with people in a different way.
Amanda, were the outcomes of the public engagement events what you expected?
I don't think we had an expectation. I think that our whole point in developing the process the way that we did was to bring people together to have conversations about what it would mean to have an expanded narrative around who we are as a city and what our commemorative spaces look like. And how many of you even know what commemorative space means? Some. Maybe. I think that's also important to talk about. The statue has been the convener of the conversation, because Mellon's object of their grant fund is to think about what the future of commemorative spaces look like. And that means where we commemorate things, people, events that have happened that are important to us as a culture. And when we talk about commemorative spaces, we mean the culture as a whole, public as a whole country. And so how do you begin to do that in a way that is inclusive to everyone? No one knows, or they wouldn't be pouring money into this conversation, right? These are all small experiments for them to then be able to say, like, this works, this doesn't, this might work. We should learn more about it or research more about it or try it again in a different way. But I think when we built the engagement, and Kim can talk a little bit about the structure, we built it in ways to begin to explore what that means. So if you asked anyone what it means to see your culture in a commemorative space, what are the answers? And I think, and I might jump a little bit down here, but some of the common themes were like, family is so important to our culture. Food is so important to our culture. Being in nature is so important to our culture. These specific plants.
And I want to add to, like, I think we were trying to design it so that the entire thing was a big old invitation. We're inviting you to share your story as it relates to culture. And we're trying to invite as many people in the space with the hope and the intention that no one takes up too much space in there. So there's room for everyone and room to see where all of this belongs. Can it all fit? Like, are we big enough as a city? Are we big enough as a community for all of this to fit in the same space? I don't think people expected the kinds of questions that we asked, for sure. And in fact, I think some of the questions frustrated people, sometimes, because I think there were some points where people wanted to have a direct conversation either about the statue or about race or about, politics or something like that. And we were asking deeper kinds of questions to kind of get to the root. What's the root? And let's talk about that. And even with the questions, we weren't sure what people were going to say or how they were going to approach their answer, what story they were going to contribute to the question. And I will say that what ended up happening, and this is just like the divine showed up for this, what people ended up submitting in their stories, there were patterns that emerged, very, very specific patterns that emerged that ended up being much more helpful than if we would have asked directed and intentional questions. Answer it this way so we can see where you're going to go to. That wouldn't actually have been as helpful as what we ended up receiving. We have a lot of work to do, and this is bigger than the statue, so I don't know if this belongs to a question per se, but one of the things I think that showed up is we have a lot of work to do in figuring out how to be a community. I don't think, in my personal opinion, as the person holding all of the stories from these spaces, that we have historically, especially in recent times, done a great job of being in community with each other. We are very insular. It is very prickly at times. And because there's so much divisiveness, there's a lot of fear. And fear leads to wanting preservation of self, wanting to survive. And if we would have asked very targeted questions, we would have never gotten the emotion to come up that needed to come up. So we know, not just for us, but honestly, how this points back to the city, like, what are we going to do, like, to help people feel safer beyond just whatever is or is not going to be a figure that's standing on a block of whatever. What are we going to do to give people an opportunity to try to do a better job of being in community with each other?
Shelley, what were some themes that struck you or some things that came up in the community conversations that surprised you?
Kim said it. I'll go a little deeper, but one of the themes that really pushed and really came to the surface in the Indigenous community was, how do we define community? And we actually, instead of, meeting the Indigenous community within the project, we actually met as a community outside the project. But it really stemmed from the project itself. The project was, I would say, it was a pathway for us to create the dialogue that was needed to have conversations about key things, about cultural things, about identity, about, what is community, about what do we need, about, politics, about emotions. And so to us, it came back to us holding a space last month in a library here in Central Ohio in Columbus. We had over Indigenous people from all over the state came together and, really talked about the need for community. And the invitation that I put out there was exactly what Kim alluded to, which is, what is community? Let's have a conversation around what is our community. Especially culturally, we know that in our traditional Lakota values, our community held the space for values to be lived. So we have 7 traditional values. So for example, what does it look like to live generosity? You can't do it by yourself. You have to have community. You have to have somebody else. You cannot heal if you want to heal or move forward and live by yourself. You have to have a relationship with each other, whether you're a human being or a relationship with the living world, with trees and with the clouds and with your water. And so for us, that's a common theme that emerged that is really special to the Indigenous community. Is it was a gift that brought us together. Another theme that really dives into the community is that relationship piece. Is that there you have this grant and it has its assurances, and you have the staff and you have community, and really community and the grant, everybody's looking for what it is that they want out of this project. And to me, there was as Erin said, we needed the time. We got the time, but there needs to be more time. It's very apparent that community wants to exist, and but it's a common theme that we may not know how to do it together, and that there needs to be time to build relationships, to build trust, to have these dialogues, these conversations with each other about, who am I, and really go internal and talk about, what does it mean to experience community? How do we define it? Is it an event we go to? Is it when we're in community, when we're in a group and we sing together? What is community? What does it mean to live and participate? And what type of emotions do you want to experience in community? And that's done with the people that are are foundational to that group of people. And so to me, that's the common theme, is that everyone wants it. No one knows how to get it.
And and I apologize for interrupting, Shelley, but another pattern I think that showed up is, and most communities have wounds, deep wounds that are impairing or impacting their ability to experience community, right? One of the first questions we asked in the World Cafe, and part of how we designed it, was we designed the community conversations to go from big conversations to small. What are the big patterns that show up? And then how do we take this small? And we realized, because this wasn't the initial part of the design, but we realized after having the big one, there was a lack of people feeling fully and completely safe in a huge shared space. We're like, we're going to have to break this down into affinity spaces, so that you're having almost family-based conversations so that we can go back out to a bigger conversation, right? And one of the first questions that we asked in the big space, we were trying to go right into it, is most of the world, nations in the world, have been conquered by someone else. Most. It is amazing how the story showed up in a way that displayed a lack of trust because of that. So then I trust people who are from my group, and I love people in general. However, this is the story, right? And so then something different happens. We can have a great conversation about food and culture and music and this whole kind of deal. But once it starts getting into conversations about power, control, culture, shared space, these kinds of things, it got very tense. That's where safety goes out the window, right? And this is part of it's just like, so then how do you do that? All of these things are still true. These things did happen. And we have documents and researchers that pulled up all of this research. So these things did happen, right? And then we had human being stories in the rooms to say, yes, this happened. And I'm not just talking about to this country. I'm telling people were sitting across the table from each other saying, this is the story of when my mother, grandmother, great grandmother came here. Here's what happened. This is what they experienced. This hurt. This made us afraid. Many cultures had the experience of we lost our food or our language or our religion or whatever, the things that happen with colonization. So when you tried to start gathering these pieces back, how many stories did we hear about someone saying, well, we still celebrate our culture, but I don't speak the language anymore, or these kinds of things, right? So then we want to say, okay, now let's do community. How? We have to start over, and we don't know how to do it. And it showed up in the room. Pride and fear showed up in the room.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, the larger event or the early events were larger and multicultural, and then later on you created these focus groups for affinity groups. So what were some other things that you learned in those smaller groups that you didn't hear in the larger groups?
One of the things that was fascinating, there were several questions that we asked. We asked each group the exact same thing. And one of the things that we would ask them is, what do you think other people see when they see you as an affinity group, right? And so then people are talking about what essentially we would call like stereotype threats, stigmas, these kinds of things, prejudices, these kinds of things. What was really interesting and beautiful is when we would ask them, what do you see when you see yourself in your culture? And these beautiful things that people shared about how they see themselves, right? It was like this moment where like every room needed that moment of personal affirmation. We're awesome. We are beautiful people. We've gone through these things, and survival, restoration is part of the stories. Everyone needed that part of the story shared. It's hard to do that when people are doing trauma battling, in a shared space. One of the beautiful things that was shared is when we asked people, separate from the specificity of a statue, what would it look like for your culture to be honored? Most people didn't say a statue. I don't know if any room said a statue. Like, people describe different kinds of things. And I thought that was very interesting because there is a shift in how people choose to be culturally honored. Something different is happening. And so I think that'll be interesting to see if we are to honor what the stories that were shared with us. What does that look like for the future of design, for the future of community?
But the pervasive conversation was that every culture, every affinity group wanted to be seen in public space.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to the root of you both talking about community and how everyone wants community. But in order to be in community, you have to be seen and fully seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the things that we uncovered is that when everyone was together, no one felt fully seen except for those who already were in power or whose stories were already the prevailing story of our commemorative spaces and centered, yes.
Erin, well, first of all, I skipped over you on themes and surprises. Were there themes and surprises for you that haven't already been shared? Do you want to read that?
Well, I actually wrote down a memory just in the conversation that's been happening, a memory from the Story Lab event that we had in April. It was at the Ohio History Center, and it was a beautiful panel. Actually, Kim and Shelley were both on that panel. And I think, Shelley, this is something that you said there when you were talking about your family's story. Thinking about our grandparents, we are here because they survived. I've had the luxury to never think of that sentence before, right? But these are the kinds of conversations that, are happening when we're building space for them. And to think about, I think another piece of that is, I think one of the questions also from that event that Kim asked the entire panel was, how do you think your grandmother's grandmother is hoping you experience your culture today? And some people were like, I don't even know my grandmother's name. I know my grandmother's mother's name, but my personal story doesn't even go back that far. So I feel like it's not just lip service when we say this is bigger than a statue. This really, as someone experiencing these events with everyone else in the room, it really makes you pause and think more thoughtfully about your family and your story, and just even the way Kim started the evening tonight. Who are you here with? Who do you bring with you? I, having lost both my parents, I don't think about that much. I have to say, I think about missing them, but I don't think about them maybe with me all the time in the way that I have certainly thought through the events that we've had here with this project.
So one of the fundamentals of this whole question is what stories are and are not told in the visual landscape of our day-to-day lives. And I wonder, I guess, Kim or Shelley, or really anyone, what stories are currently missing or underrepresented in our public spaces?
What time is this over?
I was gonna say.
So maybe pick like one. I mean, you all have been thinking about this, and this is obviously one of the central questions of the project. But
I'll give you a small example. Young people, right? And not just this project, but I can't tell you from doing community work how many the rooms that are designed for the future lack young people in them. We're literally planning the future world for people to live in who are going to inherit everything we design. And then in many cases, we get frustrated if we feel like they didn't honor what we designed, which was not necessarily with them in mind, because if you spend any time and talk with young people on how they would design something, it almost never looks like what we designed. The programs, how many people have youth-based programs and the kids hate it? And then you ask the kids, well, what would you do? And they're like, not this, And then we're like, well, we have $800,000 to spend on what, it's like they're usually not in the room, and they're inheriting things that are not in alignment. It is disingenuous of us to build a future, and they were not in the narrative. So that's been missing.
Other folks want to raise up one of the millions of examples.
I think, Jen, it's important to note that to date, the City of Columbus does not have a public art program with a sustainable funding mechanism. Most cities have those stories displayed in public spaces because a long time ago, most of them in the 50s, 60s, and 70s committed to doing that and committed to making investments in their public spaces that would realize and recognize the contributions of all these different cultures in the cities that those were in. Our city, for whatever reason, did not do that. They are working on that now, but that's not been the case. And so when you look around, those stories are missing. You can call it what it is, because there hasn't been funding, because there hasn't been a desire. I mean, those two things are one and the same, I think. But I think with this project and other initiatives, a lot of that is changing. But I think that other cities are able to come to different conclusions about their public spaces because they have such large collections in their public art collections, and we don't have that. And so we can't make decisions like that because we don't have a large collection.
I think too about how it's honored, right? And so, Shelley, I was thinking about you, as I do anyway, my dear. But I was thinking about you. I was, I don't know what I was doing. I was looking over something, maybe weather or something, and I'm looking over how many streets, names, cities, counties are indigenous names, right? And we think about like, how to say Scioto, how to say, Tuscarawas County, all these kinds of things, not knowing, do you know who that's connected to? Like, on whose land are we standing? Who lived here before? Like, this is like, and how have those stories been honored? I think those are also missing voices where, like, I think about, when I saw some of the footage from the hikes, and it's like, you can barely tell what the mound was, or you can barely tell what this was. They're like, we know it's the Scioto River. Do you ever think about why you know how to pronounce Scioto? Have you ever had someone come to visit you here and you know what all these streets are, like Olentangy, and you're like, duh, it's Olentangy. Well, why do you know how to say that? Most of these names are not ours. We inherited them but not the story. And I think that also, that's a voice that's untold also.
Erin, you said at the top that that this process was perhaps quite different from others that had been undertaken by the city, and that this has been billed as potentially a new way for the city to explore new modes of engagement. Do you think that these events have been successful? And I mean, I hope you're certainly going to say yes to that. But whether the city would how the city might use these models in the future.
One of the things, so as we mentioned at the top, I was brought into the city to work on this project. So the not only was I lucky to get to know the people that Amanda pulled together for this team, but I'm also getting to know people that work within the Department of Development, that work at the city, learning kind of the way the city operates, and that is all new to me as well, coming from nonprofit space. But one of the things that a colleague said to me right as we started talking about what this engagement series was going to look like. We were going to have these conversations. There were round tables. There's no front of the room. There's no Q&A microphone. We're going to have these walks in nature. We're going to have these youth workshops. We're going to do these other things. And one of the things that my colleague said to me was, this is very interesting because sometimes maybe it feels like when we the city, and insert whatever your definition of that term means to you, but we the city maybe only engage with the community when we need something from the community, and maybe that feels transactional. And what does it look like to find a way to create relationship, to create genuine connection when we don't need something, so that when we do need something, we have a relationship built. And that was something that I hadn't thought about because I don't have the city lens, but it was something that I think I've talked more and more about with other colleagues. And yeah, I think that it's important that we show up. It's important that we make room for everyone to be in the space with us. And only in our success are we going to see it replicated. So I think there's definitely curiosity about that, and there's opportunity for that too.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Amanda, so how will the insights gathered from the engagement series inform the design process in the year to come?
So we're doing something a little bit different in our design process. Usually you have community engagement, and then you hand all that content to the designers, and the folks who facilitated the engagement are kind of out of the process, or they might come back and bring the design on behalf of the designers back to the public and collect some comments. We're doing things a little different, and I think that that's caused the designers some heartburn. Kim has been sitting in every design meeting, and all the stories that she's been bringing with her that she's heard throughout the entire process, she's like, I don't think that's what I heard when you're putting that rock in that area. Can we discuss that? Or if the building is oriented this way, or if the statue is oriented this way, I don't think that that's what I heard from the community. So can we talk about why you, as a designer, think that's the best decision? It has caused the design process to move slower than I think it usually would, but it is moving with intention. And I hope that we are nowhere near any kind of final design or anywhere near anything. But we have these moments that we're seeing in our future that are, I hope, getting closer and closer to a design experience. And so we're taking all those stories, we're integrating those comments literally because we know that our end user is both the city and our elected officials, but it's also the public. We want to honor their contributions by saying, we heard you say this, therefore this. We heard you say this, therefore we did not do this, or we did do this, or we chose this reason because of this. Our intention in the spring is to go back to those community groups, specifically starting small and then getting big again. So reverse engineering the way that we got to where we are now. But asking those folks in affinity groups who showed up and saying, did we hear you correctly? We're going to make a presentation. This is what we think we heard, and this is how it translated into what we're doing. And then taking all those comments and going back to the designers and saying, now react to these comments. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that's exactly right. It's interesting too, for me to see a design process holding, like as the holder of like these gifts that people have given to me. When I'm learning from working with Shelley, from working with Tamara, about even things like, people say, well, we're going to do this with the watering. Like, no, you don't touch water. right? And it's like, oh, and then thinking like, oh, that makes sense because this honors this story and this story and this story that we heard, or even thinking going all the way back to like safety or fear. Like these kinds of things make people feel fearful. If it's designed this way, this will support this and not that. And it's been a learning experience for me to say, oh, I see. I'm so grateful that I was involved in the project. Because the first meeting, I'm like, should I be here? But
You
But-
do still text every Friday at 1. Should I be in the meeting at 2?
I'm like, yes, okay, but in doing so, I'm much more appreciative of these processes because I realize how much of people's stories get left out of design.
And I don't think that's intentional.
It's not, but there's a lot that gets lost in translation, and that's kind of frightening for me. So I was like, ooh, there were some moments where I'm like, I'm talking too much, but I'm also holding hundreds of stories in my head from all these communities, none of who are necessarily everyone's based on virtue asking for similar things, but specificity is very different. And to figure that out, I give so many kudos to the designers who are being so thoughtful and so intentional about the details of everything. And I think it's been a humongous learning process. And I can say that every iterative process of the design has flown. And so like the learning, the lectures, the research, you can see everything unfold in what's, I think, going to come to fruition.
Will the recommended design or designs include the statue?
Yes, some of them will. We're going back to the public, I hope, in the spring. And again, we're going to be taking all those comments in from the public. And so I think there's a second layer of that feedback that we're seeking. We want the reaction of the public as to how we recontextualize the statue in a new public space. And we'll be taking those comments into consideration as we move toward final design.
And so what is happening with regard to new art at City Hall?
So one of the parts of this commitment, so we've got the Mellon funding, which is separate private funding, but also at the time of the award of this grant, Mayor Ginther also pledged $1.5 million towards creating new public art at City Hall. So the Columbus statue was the only public art on the campus at the time. And so this was an opportunity for us to again, take these same kind of design concepts that are coming up in the design process for the statue, but also apply them to City Hall campus, if you will. So not just the building, but, maybe some of the park space that's around it as well. And so that plan is also forthcoming in the next year. How we manage that is still to come, but that's definitely a part of, it's not a part of the, well, the plan is part of the grant, but the fulfillment of that is something that's separate that would come after, this final kind of presentation.
And so what role will City Hall play in leading up to that final recommendation?
So the grant as it's written is that the project team makes a recommendation that goes to the mayor's desk for his acceptance or rejection. Of course, our hope is that it is an acceptance because we've worked with the community, we've worked with city leadership throughout this process. And that's been what I've been doing a lot is, again, keeping everyone up to date. I presented to several different departments over the last couple of weeks to give kind of this presentation to city administration as well, because, not everyone's able to come here or watch this video afterwards. So as far as that, the project is really just a presentation and an acceptance. One of the other things about the funding from the Mellon Foundation or the Monuments Project itself that Mellon has funded, initially that the amount of money they were committing to it was $250 million. They have doubled that commitment to $500 million for all of these projects that are happening nationwide. And that is because they wanted to have funding available to help build whatever recommendations come out of the work that all the different grantees are doing. So that's a conversation for 26 and beyond. But so, of course, anything that has to do with the placement of the Christopher Columbus statue itself would go in front of the Art Commission, the Columbus Art Commission for review and approval. But that's kind of where the work of this project ends and the work of what's next begins.
Well, on that topic of what is next, so sort of what else is next for Reimagining Columbus, and how can the community continue to be involved in shaping the future of the city's commemorative landscape, our new favorite term?
Well, like I said, we'll be having these small focus groups and then getting large. We hope those begin in the spring. I would say probably March, We are in mid-January right now. So we are thinking that those will begin in March. We're hoping to engage with those small affinity groups that we have already engaged with, as well as expand those to have more in-depth youth conversations. And then we will be coming back to the public in a more traditional form with those dots and boards and post-it notes. That we hope will be toward the end of the spring.
All right. Well, we do have some time for questions. Emphasis on questions. There are comment cards at the back. So our very favorite reminder for Q&As is that questions end with a question mark. So we have a friend running a mic and
First off, I just wanted to thank you for all of the hard work that you have been putting into, all of this. I know it is not a easy thing to do, and it is very passionate, and there are passions on both sides of the spectrum. And I appreciate all of the stories and all of the events that are going into there. My question and my comment is, on the other side of that spectrum, I'm a very proud Italian American, and and I don't want to get into the whole piece of that, but I do not see, I see the indigenous side up on there and on the stage and telling the stories and stuff like that, and I am not hearing anything from the Italian side and how it impacts us. And I think those two sides are very passionate on both sides of the coin on that. So I guess my question is, is there that presence on the board in those high level meetings that is having an impact on that? And, how can we make sure that our voices are being heard and not feeling like a minority? And that's my question. Thank you for your time.
I will add, thank you for that question. So the people that are on the stage tonight are facilitators of the events. They're not necessarily people that were participating in those events. We do, in addition to the structure that we've talked about, we also have an advisory committee of community members. This is similar to the statue committee that Shelley mentioned earlier being a part of. And we do have members of the Italian community, representatives from some of the Italian clubs are actually here tonight that are on that committee. And that is an important part of this project. We talk about the statue. Our statue has a different story than most Columbus statues in town. So, our statue was a gift from Genoa, our first sister city relationship. That is an important part of the story. And as we have learned, if we started this work and we had kind of our idea of the order of things and how things would be released and how we would get to the next chapters, we have found that everything takes a little bit longer. So there are additional pieces of work that are still being done, that are still to come. We do have videos online that are telling the stories of our Italian American community members and their family stories of immigration. That's a part of the series that we have online right now. And there are more of those pieces to come.
Good evening, ladies. Wonderful, just a wonderful presentation. And I just also wanted to give kudos not only for the storytelling, but the fabulous photography. I don't know who the photographer was.
They're in the front taking pictures.
I got to talk to you. She's a great editorial photographer. She's fantastic. Wonderful, wonderful work. So my question is, I love the idea of the community coming together and the holistic and the storytelling from that perspective, but I'm very curious about any personal stories of transformation through this process that any one of you have experienced, because we all go through that stretching also as we're a part of these projects. So I'm just curious if anyone wants to share.
I can share one. It's in progress, so I'm still working on the healing. How do I want to do this? Okay, so this project, there's a lot of passion and a lot of love and a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of all of the emotions from every vantage point one might imagine. And in the affinity spaces, we had the same questions that we asked everyone, and folks would write down, their thoughts about the thing. So we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I wish we had a data point. I don't even know if we can count it now, of data points on how many different things people wrote on Post-it notes. When I would take all of the Post-it notes back home, my more times than not, my children who are older are the people who would type up all of these notes. I can't tell you what it was like for my babies to type up some things that people wrote. Their passion, their pain. There were some things that they were like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And there were some things that actually hurt them when they looked at some of those Post-it notes to see what people wrote down. That was a whole thing that made this project very personal for me. It was anyway, and I'm an empath anyway. But to see how my work was showing up in the spirit and the emotion and the energy of my children through affinity lenses of others was a thing. And I didn't even tell y'all this. And in that, because of all of this dialogue, my oldest, who is a senior at Ohio State, she said she has been wanting to study abroad anyway. And because I think of this dialogue that's been across all of these cultures and all these things, she met with the advisor of her study abroad. And when she was narrowing down where she's going to go, she picked Italy. And she was like, I need to put everything into perspective. And this is where I think I want to go for my study abroad. And so it's still unfolding, but I'm like, this is interesting to see what happens with this story. And powerful about young people saying, I want to figure this out for myself, right? You can have a bazillion data points. And one thing I can say for myself and what I'm watching is when passion is in play, facts don't matter. People need to see and experience things for themselves. And one of the things that I'm very curious about is when all of this is said and done and the babies inherit whatever happens, what will be the story that they will tell about what this room together creates?
I shared a little bit kind of already about the kind of how I thought differently about my own family heritage or culture through these conversations. One of the things I was thinking about when we were having a conversation with each other, getting ready for tonight, I traveled to Japan in the last year, and I have forgotten, of course, the phrase. But there's a phrase that's kind of used in the tea ceremony that means kind of one time, one moment, and the concept behind that is that to stop and appreciate that we are all here together, doing a thing that will never be again the same. So even if we all got together tomorrow, we'd have a completely different conversation than we're having today. So to stop and be able to be present in the spaces, especially maybe when it's uncomfortable, and to kind of investigate why there is a discomfort, and for my own self or for ourselves. It keeps coming back to that for me, is that appreciation of there is only today, there is only now, and what we do today is going to impact tomorrow.
Excuse me. I think what y'all have been doing is wonderful. And I think often over life, I watch things that I'm like, ooh, they did not have enough people in the room before they made that decision. So I think it's great that y'all are taking so much attention to everybody. At church this last Sunday, my pastor said, don't let your movement become a monument. And I thought that was very striking. And as important as the conversation was brought up, stemming from the statue, I think the most important conversation here is the conversation that has come from it. So moving forward, is the movement further educating our community about our greater history that we didn't know before? And how does that move past once we make this decision about the statue? What's next?
anyone got a grant we can work on together?
I assume the pastor was saying that primarily because it's creating something that can be worshipped or idolized, right? The movement. Yeah, don't be stagnant. When I heard you say that, in my mind, I'm like, oh, don't make the movement the monument, which is a thing that is erected to like be the thing that we always see and that we always acknowledge and honor and pay attention to, right? That's how I took it when you said it. And I think the thing that the designers are working on right now is actually exactly the opposite of a monument to something, because what we heard over and over in the conversations was a desire for a space, a place, a space to be together, and for not to be together in the way that we are together right now, where someone's in the front and people are out in the audience, or where there is an audience, right? We heard over and over that there was just a desire for a space to hang out, to do nothing, to maybe play outside together and let adults to heal, to hug. I mean, whatever verb you want to put in there. And I think that's what the designers are actually doing, and they're actually responding to that. And there is no thing that's going to be the like image that is the image bearer of the thing that we've done, because we're creating a place for people to create their own image and be their own thing together collectively. Kim keeps talking about children and how they can reconnect with the earth, and that's Shelley's body of work is all about that. And that was something else that continued to come up. We heard over and over that a lot of families don't go to parks. They don't spend time in parks because they don't feel safe. There aren't parks that make them feel welcome. There aren't places where they can access the river and touch the water or climb down rocks. Shelley's daughter loves to get wet no matter the season. She's always in the creek. So we thought over and over about how to program spaces where children can do those things in front of their parents, and how we as a community can invite those children there so that they would then create a pattern for their families to come back and feel safe. And I think that's what we're doing. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's perfect. It's interesting when you remove. This is why we wanted the conversation to be bigger, right? Because if you just say, yes, no, put it here, do this, that, it's done. But it doesn't address what the thing is underneath. It's like the elephant in the room kind of thing, right? And it's just like, talk about it. And this is why, like when I didn't go on the hikes, but I watched the footage, right? And, but one of the things that I noticed when I was watching the footage is how important, it sounds corny if you don't do it, but like grounding matters, right? Reconnection matters. I think we're in a point in society where we are deeply disconnected to all kinds of things, and we are desperately searching for places and spaces and ways to be reconnected, and we don't know how to do it anymore. That's why I think your engagement was so critically important, because it gave people a way to practice, like, this is an idea of what it could feel like. And to watch you, and I remember when we were in that story lab and you started with your family story, and I wept with you, right? And so I can't be in a space with you and not have your lineage with me in the room. I feel like my lineage and your lineage, all of our lineages are just sitting here like, good job, granddaughters, like, but like, that's why that mattered. Like, give people an invitation to be better than you, to be bigger than this moment, this thing right here. And that did that, right? And so not just in conversations, but that's unspoken. Those aren't words for that. But seeing people forget superfluous things that don't matter and just connect to the earth, Mother Earth, this sky, those birds, these blades of grass, this human being, the wind dancing around you. Be still and listen. And that's what you did. And I thought that was beautiful. And it's like, that's not a statue.
I know I'm not part of the project team, but I can't resist saying this. That part because as a museum educator, and we are sitting in a museum right now, um, the call for us all to be continually building our critical awareness of how visual culture and objects carry stories, how they can help us to connect, the ways that people bring their own prior experiences to interpreting and misinterpreting objects, and how knowing that can help us to build deeper understanding and grow deeper curiosities. I mean, I sincerely hope that that is something that folks take out of this. And I know just knowing that this was coming up this evening, it's something that I have been harping on with some of our school groups this week, because we always bring those stories, and then there is also always that opportunity to do that deeper research to find out what you're missing, what is that context gap.
Well, I think also if someone shows us the way, right? If someone shows us how to do it, maybe we're more willing to engage with it, right? So one of the reasons we talk about the walks with Shelley are that, like how many times we could go to a metro park and take our own walk, right? We could go into a museum and look at art on the wall. Fine. It's pretty. It's a nice day. The sun is shining. But these experiences give us more context and give us a deeper connection. If you learn about the story behind the artist who made the thing or why they made the thing, then you have a better connection to the thing afterwards. If you go on a walk and you learn about a space that you saw 1,000 times, but you never thought about it that way before, so that's what this project really is doing in these engagements, and what the goals are of the project team are to really expand our awareness, and to do something with it after it's been expanded.
Thank you. Again, you guys have been doing a wonderful job. As you well know, I've been around for the last 5 years. I'm one of the individuals that really kind of asked questions as an Italian, why this was happening in 2020. I've been honored to be on this committee, but yet, you said it a moment ago, the granddaughters. You've said what what the granddaughters from this day forward, what they will be thinking. So I'm going to tell you, as a granddaughter now, as a granddaughter from the 1950s, as part of the family that was involved with Christopher Columbus, there is so happy that the Italians are a part of this, but not the part we still want to be. We aren't up there. You listen to us, you hear our emails, you recognize us. This is not a total criticism. Please understand that. It's just, why again, as we've been asking for many years now, why aren't we up there? And why isn't the Italian vision recognized and talked about as everyone else's is? Because kind of we are, not taking any away from Native Americans, but we are here also as immigrants to this country and gave to this country. And yet, as I've said many times, because we become more Americanized, things were taken from us. We aren't, what are we? We are not culturally, I don't want to say accepted, but just we've become too Americanized to somewhat be heard, I guess is what I'm saying, still after 5 years. That's it.
So it's kind of a two-part question. So is this statue going to be put back? Is it going to be reinstalled? The Columbus statue?
Is it going to be where?
So not put back. So part of the director from the mayor is that it won't go back where it was. It's not going back to City Hall. So what this project is to determine a recontextualization of the statue. In what way can we present the statue that tells a fuller picture of history and feels inclusive to our community today?
So if it's reinstalled, it's like 10, 12, 15 feet tall. How are you going 20? Well, there you go. So how are you going to make sure that doesn't like dwarf the rest of the scening and the setting and things like that of where it's installed?
We have a wonderful design team, if I haven't mentioned that yet. And they are thinking about that, right? So part of the conversation has been the scale of the statue where it was on City Hall's campus. It was the first thing you saw when you went up the stairs. That prominence has played such an important role in the story of our city and in the story of the Italian Americans that gave it to the city of Columbus, along with our sister city, Genoa. We do not want to in any way remove that story or not tell that story. However, we do want to acknowledge that large feeling, that raised position of the statue had a purpose, and that was to be honored and to play prominence. And it has done that since 1955 until 2020. And so this is going to be different. We are still going to honor the statue and the story. It is a beautiful story. We have heard many, many stories of different Italian Americans who have shared those with us, that their families have been involved for many, many years in Italian clubs. Many of them brought the statue here, raised money. We got to see stuff that was in the boot of the statue. We got to film what was in the time capsule, and the things that people put in there were awesome. I mean, there were like ads from Italian businesses. There were like
high school photos of their children. Yeah, it was great.
And we want to celebrate and honor those stories. But it will not be in a way that you have to look up at the statue that you have in the past.
Thank you. So my question is for Kim and Shelley. Can you give us examples of where you find representations of your culture in Columbus or Indigenous people in general, and that are any of those representations in a way that your family can relate to? Like, do they experience those cultures and those stories in schools? Do they experience those cultures and stories in other displays throughout the city? If you can let us know how you feel like your culture and your community is currently being represented in the city of Columbus, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. As far as if we're talking about public art and education, documented history, that's what's missing. As far as going back to one of the questions that was asked to the panelists, the Indigenous narrative has been largely, essentially left out. And there is a concept of erasure that is happening across the United States, whether comes down to critical race theory. But what I experience in terms of what is out there in society and the norms of society does not dictate the experience that I lead with my children. So, and what I mean by that is going back to, if I were to share a little bit of history about, Indigenous people, but specifically the Lakota Nation, is that I know a lot of you are familiar with, the Wounded Knee Massacre, and maybe even heard about the Dakota 38 underneath the hand of Abraham Lincoln, one of our presidents, 6 days before he wrote in the Emancipation Proclamation. And so with that, there has been stories that haven't been shared about the murders of our ancestors. But that doesn't take away from what it is that I share with my children, which is the stories, the verbal stories that I tell them, whether it's through song, whether it's in the form of prayers, whether it's in our activities of, practicing or learning to connect with the trees and with the birds and the bees and explaining how life is connected in all these various ways. That is a lived experience. And for us traditional people, as I mentioned before, written language is not a part, it's not ingrained in us. And it shows up, my child, is considered dyslexic. And so was I, and so was my mother. And my grandmother was a part of the boarding school system, so technically not in this education system. But my mother and I and my daughter are, that were a part of like public school systems or Bureau of Indian Affairs schools, federal schools. And with that, I will tell you that I didn't learn about my own history through the school system. I learned about it in my family's, our stories, stuff that was handed down orally. And so I would say that I don't look outside in the rest of society by who's written the stories, because they're not reflective of me and my culture. And instead, what I do is I live it. I create my own experiences with my daughters. I understand that, like, even in this space, that we are creating memory and that we each show up with emotion, whether it's a negative, positive, or neutral, and that ingrains into our body, into our DNA. That's what I teach my daughters. And that we do a form of connecting via song energy, producing energy together that looks like creating stories. It might look like play. It might look like having an experience. But to me, that's how I live my culture. That's what a lived experience looks like. To me, it looks like creating intentional lived spaces by being intentional with the emotions that I want to feel and the memories that I want to create that are going to be ingrained inside of me and my children. And I know blood memory and DNA memory is so strong. It's been scientifically proven, but in indigenous knowledge, we've always known that. We know that water has memory. We know the land holds memory. We are energy. Like every single one of us, we're energy. And our ability to connect with different energies in the living world is what the indigenous knowledge is really rooted in. And so I don't rely on the rest of society to tell me who I am and what life I lived and what my ancestors lived, but it lives on through stories. And I know, and I've shared this with the panelists, is that I know that they're with us and they get to live in a spiritual way our stories. They get to, whether it was they prayed us into existence, we are here. And when we get to walk throughout this life, we get to be their wildest dreams. They get to walk alongside us and live that lived experience. And so I am teaching my daughters to not rely on whoever writes the books to tell them who they are, that they really get to decide that for themselves. And so, that's how I'd answer that question.
In the interest of time, I'll make this very quick. There's an African proverb, I'm going to mess it up, but it basically says, until the lion has its own narrator, the story will always glorify the hunter. I think from African-centered culture, there's very little, maybe almost nothing, that tells the full narrative. In most places and spaces, especially in the United States, one would believe that Black people's story starts with slavery. It does not. And so even today, like I was reading through Charlie's essay for Study Abroad, and in her essay, it's so fitting that this happened today, literally. She's writing in her essay, my mom had to teach me these things, right? It wasn't in school. It wasn't in like the Longstreet Bridge is the closest thing we can get to saying this is kind of what something looked like. And this is like a piece of it. But then there's not the story of like the Longstreet Bridge is there because this was a thriving Black community that got destroyed with the 70-71 split due to redlining, blah, blah, blah. Like there's not always context for all of these stories. So the short answer is no. But it goes back to until the lion has its own narrator, the story will always glorify the hunter. So I feed them what I want them to know. And then the other part of it goes back to a lot of what you said is like, we're carrying the stories, right? Where there is a thing such as epigenetic trauma, there's also ancestral memory. And I'm knowing that we're experiencing epigenetic trauma, and I'm purposefully working on the healing journeys so that we can tap into the ancestral memory, so we can fill in the places and spaces where there's not a thing to show like you're here and you're here and you're here. You are everywhere. You're all of this. We're all of this, right? And that it's possible that you can be all of this, and Italian culture can be all of this, and indigenous culture can be all of this. We don't need 1,000 monuments to all be present all at the same time. And how do I do that in a way that also doesn't decenter my culture from the big narrative? That's the trick. Honoring all of this, letting my daughter know, like, you get to be the main character in your story, and it doesn't take any power away from anyone else for you to be the main character in your story. That's the trick. It's possible. We're figuring it out. Thank you for that question.
So these are really big conversations, and we are all hoping that they are going to continue. You can continue them in the cafe over dinner, or beyond tonight. But tonight, and Shelley is going to close us out with something to help set a nice tone. But before we transition to that, this evening was intended to recap a year of a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of wondering. So before we hand it over to Shelley, was there anything else that anybody is burning to share about this year that you just haven't gotten to yet? Yeah, I mean, check out the website for more learning, I guess. There's that. Shelley,
www.reimaginingcolumbus.com.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to wrap us up. And, as we all are present in this space, the clear themes, from this is that this project is a story. It's a living story. It's a living thing fed by all of the energy, by the community, by the participants, by everybody who's had a hand in it. And the themes of creating community and deepening relationships and developing trust and having, and like the question becomes is, how do we do that? How do we create community? How do we develop and become better to lead and create a better future that we all want to live in? And so it starts with a question, and a question to be open to learning and learning together. And so how I'm going to close this tonight is I'm going to share a prophecy, an indigenous prophecy from an elder, a Hopi elder named Thomas Biancia. And he spoke this to the UN General Assembly in the early 1990s. And I'm hoping that in sharing this and me sharing my energy with you and the energy that are held in these words, that the prophecy will help plant a seed of question. Okay. So you have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Know your garden. It's time to speak your truth. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. This elder then clasped his hands together. He smiled and said, "This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there will be those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel like they're being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. Know the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river. Keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, We are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, the spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time for the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your vocabulary and your attitude. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the people we have been waiting for. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.